So as Lisa said, I am Ze'ev Gedalof, and I'm a member of the Department of Geography, Environment, and Geomatics at the University of Guelph. And I run the Climate and Ecosystem Dynamics Research Laboratory, and I chose this font specifically to annoy Lisa. She's supposed to laugh at that, but maybe she's muted. So if you had told me 30 odd years ago that I would spend my life studying tree rings, I would have laughed. And yet that is what I have done. And what I have tried to do more than anything is just listen to the trees. And sometimes I do it through the soles of my feet, and sometimes I do it through my ears, and mostly I do it through computers. Probably I should have known this was going to come. This is me at about 10 years old. This is one of my first introductions to nature. It was a canoe trip with my father, who I spoke with this morning, and who reminded me why it is that I do what I do. This is me at age 13, my first real encounter with nature, a great blue heron. And sooner or later, every biogeographer needs to work with birds. And this is where I started. Somehow, over a very long period of time, I ended up studying tree rings. And I don't know why, and I don't know how, but I have no regrets. Or in heron terms, I have no egrets. Trees tell us stories if we slow down and learn to listen to them. This particular tree was born in 1988 and died in 1996 and was hit by a snow avalanche in about 1995. And we can learn that through reading its rings. I've tried to make my science exciting to my students. They mostly don't understand it. So this is the lore of the tree rings. This is the Twee Wing saga, if you will. Harry Potter and the Trees of Drought. This is very much a one-way conversation right now. Usually my students laugh a little bit, but I can't hear you laughing. I hope that you are. But what I want to tell you today is a story of what I have learned from trees through 5 different trees. And this is me avoiding my office hours. This is Tibet. And I asked our guides, what do I call my horse? And they would just said Ma. And I later learned that Ma is merely Chinese for horse. This is the first of our trees. This is mountain hemlock. Mountain hemlock, for me, was a bit of a gateway drug. It was the first tree that I ever studied. It was the first tree that told me that we could learn about the past by looking at what trees have to tell us, and that we could learn about weather from what the trees have to say. So this is the science part of it. This is what it looks like when you look inside of a tree. So this particular tree is from, as it was then called, Queen Charlotte Islands, as we now call it, Haida Gwaii. And you can see, I hope, that there's variability in the growth of the tree from year to year, that some years are conducive to good growth and other years are bad. But this, we can reconstruct, and this is what I do for my job. This is how I pay the bills, is to understand what we can figure out as best as possible about the past weather by looking at the variation in the growth of these trees. They sit there silently, continually. Unlike weather stations, they don't move, and they just record what's happening to them. And so 1977 was a huge snow year in Haida Gwaii, and it has a very narrow ring associated with it. 1989 was another year of an awful lot of snow. And so by coring into these trees and listening to what they have to say, to what they have recorded while we weren't paying attention, we could learn about what was happening in the environment. And I think that's pretty amazing. Here is my second tree. This is Douglas fir. I'm going to call it the workhorse in the tree ring community. It grows all over Western North America, and we've used it for everything from reconstructing floods and droughts to fire to, in this case, my friend Karen here is looking up at a culturally modified tree, one that First Nations used for all kinds of things that I won't pretend to even begin to understand. But these trees grow to be 1,000 years old, and we find them in really unexpected places. But they're, I'm looking for the right word here. They're logographers. There is an actual Latin word for this. They just record history, and they're so good at it. And they are by far the most important tree in the tree ring community. So I have used them in particular for understanding how CO2 changes, how climate change, how the burning of fossil fuels has affected the world. Here is my third tree that I want to talk about. This is Bristol cone pine. And that's me trying to explain to a bunch of students why I think it's important. And I will get rid of the picture of me and just put up some good pictures of Bristol cone pine. These are, as far as we know, the oldest living organisms in the world. These two guys, one of them is the Methuselah tree, 4,500 years old, the possibly oldest tree in the world. I have a colleague who has found one that is now confirmed to be over 5,000 years old, but he won't tell anyone where it is because he's afraid that people will want to go and take samples. We have this fascination with collecting things, and he rightfully does not want to contribute to that. But what the Bristol cone pine has taught us, the lesson that it has to teach us, is about changes in our environment. It grows, as I hope you can see, in the absence of understory vegetation, shrubs, grasses surrounding vegetation. And that's part of why it is able to live for so long. And the lesson that I think that it has to tell us is just this very, very slow chemical signature of how our world is changing and how we are changing our world. And we need to stop and slow down and listen to what the trees have to tell us. My final tree story is of white cedar. This is my friend Peter Kelly. And for those of you who are tuning in from Ontario, this is right outside our back door. These are the oldest confirmed trees in Canada. I have a sample that I would, if I could, if it was handy, I would just pick it up and show it to you. But I couldn't find it when I went to look for it this morning. These trees are 1,500 years old. And we have a story from them that goes back 3,500 years. And we have additional stories from these trees that go back close to 10,000 years. They go back to the last glaciation. This is outside our back window. They are all around us if we slow down and if we listen. And we're still learning what these trees have to tell us. When Doug Larson and Pete Kelly first collected these things, they were looking for a story of drought. They were looking for a story about water flowing off of the escarpment and into the Niagara Valley. And instead, I mean, they found that, but we have since then found stories about changes in agriculture. We have got stories about changes in the carbon composition of the atmosphere, thanks to the burning of fossil fuels. It's a really great, I mean, it's a terrible and great story. But when we listen, when we look, when we slow down, there are things to be found. My final story and my land acknowledgement is of Garry Oak. This is a tree that exists in British Columbia, and it occupies our newest national park, the Gulf Islands National Park Reserve. And this, I think, brings together what it is that I want to say about trees. We're learning all kinds of stuff from Garry Oak, but most importantly, we're learning that our Indigenous peoples were cultivators of our landscape long before Western people arrived. And I took this picture at the end of a long day of doing field work. And I looked back as we were approaching the truck, and I looked up through the flowers, and I saw the oak through the mist. And I think this might be the first time that I actually saw the oak trees. And this picture has been published in, I think, in National Geographic, but widely published. And I took it by mistake. And I took it reflecting back on a hard day of work. But I took it because I was captured. Anyway, welcome to my world. Keep your tent closed because mosquitoes want to get in.